The worst call I have ever received was for a dual fatality drunk driving accident. We were dispatched at approximately 11 p.m. to a motor vehicle accident. A small sedan, mid-90s Honda, that had struck a large tree. The caller advised that bodies were hanging out of the vehicle and that there was lots of blood. We arrived on scene to find that 2 of our volunteers had pulled 3 victims from the vehicle, which became fully engulfed in flames shortly after. The man was in his late 40s. He had suffered numerous lacerations, the most being a severed femoral artery. He died within minutes. His daughter also had lacerations, but because she was in the back seat, had massive internal bleeding. She also died on scene. The driver had to be extracted from the vehicle and was transported via helicopter and remained in ICU for weeks. Remember to wear your seatbelt. None of them were, and don't drink and drive either. I spent 5 years in the Marines, did 2 years in Iraq, and I have never seen a more gory scene. I am a firefighter / EMT, and have seen a few things, but this call had something that I still can't explain. At the time, me and my partner were doing online training. When the medical tones dropped, Med Unit Station 4, be advised we need you to respond to a 1-vehicle rollover off Interstate, PD on scene. My partner and I, adrenaline pumping to the scene, code 3. Many things go through your head for vehicle rollovers, so of course, we were wondering if there were any patients ejected from the vehicle. Are there multiple patients on scene? Is there anyone trapped in the vehicle that will have to be cut out? As we approach a Toyota, 4 runners flipped onto its roof in the median of the highway, with debris everywhere, consisting of clothing, papers, and other miscellaneous items. Damage to the vehicle was extensive, but isolated to only 1 vehicle, with no others involved. As we drive up, there doesn't seem to be any people ejected from the vehicle, or signs of such. We grab our medical supplies and meet up with the officers who were talking with the driver. We were advised by the officer that the driver had swerved and the vehicle had rolled over the median and onto its roof. The driver was the only occupant of the vehicle. The driver looked untouched, and after talking to the guy, he said he was fine and refused to be assessed. Therefore, after obtaining paperwork from the driver stating he refused care, was released back into the officer's custody, who performed a sobriety test on the man and determined he was driving under the influence and was booked into custody. Several other officers arrived on scene as we waited for the tow truck, as was protocol. As I waited, I looked back at the scene and saw 2 crosses that were placed from past accidents that didn't turn out well, marking the deaths of the prior victims of fatal car accidents. Sitting between the 2, I noticed a yearbook from his vehicle was ejected and now lying between the crosses. I tell my partner, "Hey, for the heck of it, I'm going to look at the yearbook and see what page it opened up to. Wanna join?" He said no, stating he'd be freaked out and didn't even want to take the chance. I walked up to the yearbook, and lo and behold, the first page, second name, was none other than the driver himself. What does that mean? What was at play? Who knows? I'm not one to believe in the supernatural or anything like that, but what are the odds of it opening on that page? Had to be pretty astronomical. The mother of one of my friends used to be an EMT before she got into nursing. She said She'd seen all sort of stuff. Crushed heads, exploded legs, standard stuff. The one she considered the most screwed up was a call to the scene of a highway accident. Multiple cars were involved. They get to the scene, and the first responding officer basically tells them everyone's okay except that guy. He points to a truck where they can see someone kind of slumped sideways. There's blood on all the windows, and the guy, and the seat, just everywhere. She and her partner go up there, expecting to find a caved-in skull or chunk of metal sticking out of an artery. They open the door, and the dude is still alive. Small victories. They start checking him over and realize that he's not injured. They can't find a single hole that's not supposed to be there. Where did all this blood come from? By the time the dude's waking up, they get him out of the truck and into the ambulance. And on the way to the hospital, the guy tells them what was happening. He's sitting there stopped in traffic, digging for nasal gold, slightly more valuable than Reddit gold. I mean, he's really deep in there, plugging away, and he's hit from behind. His finger goes all Chilean minor, all the way down and stuck. The force of the impact had jammed his finger into his nose all the way to the base knuckle. He said he freaked out and just ripped his finger out his skull, which shredded his nasal cavity and caused the outrageous blood loss. He basically fainted out of pure fear. I responded a number of years ago to a crappy motel for a sick patient. Side note, I have a horrible track record of vague and innocuous sounding calls turning out to be awful. Anyway, there's this guy, probably in his mid-40s to 50s, moaning in pain. We enter, and he starts yelling for us to help, and pulls down his pants. It looked like someone had dropped a grenade down his drawers. His junk was swollen and distended, and not right. Various parts of it just being about every colour of the rainbow, heavy on the purples and greenish blues. Jesus. It turns out that the guy had a bad arm. If I remember correctly, he had a stroke or something and his left arm was all but totally useless. He had, for whatever reason, taken the lid/squirty bottle thing of lotion and done it with the bottle. Naturally, he got his junk stuck in there, and having only one good hand, and being in what I could imagine excruciating pain, he wasn't able to free himself. Somehow, he used a set of toenail clippers to cut away most of the bottle, except for the neck ring that was around the base of his unit. I guess he didn't want to risk snipping his manhood, and that's a pretty crappy situation. But the guy waits almost 3 days to call 911. 3 days of blood pulled and stuck from this horrible makeshift ring. From what I remember, it ended up being necrotic. The smell was almost as awful as the sight, and I think he had to get a full peniectomy. I'm not even sure why we joke about that call, but we still do to this day. I used to work out in a remote area of California, between Barstow and Las Vegas. We would get a lot of calls that seriously mess with your head. I have a lot of stories, but one that sticks out is the following. 6:30ish in the morning. We get a call for a traffic collision rollover. We get on the scene just south of town, and there is a Dodge Durango upright. The driver is out of the car, but a lot of people are gathered around about 30 feet from it. An 8-year-old male was ejected during the rollover and into a barbed wire fence that lines the freeway. The kid is breathing rapidly and has a faint pulse. He caught on the metal snakes in his right armpit area, completely avulacing the surrounding tissue. We request an airship and start packing the patient up. After we load the patient, we start heading to the local airport to rendezvous with the medical helicopter. I establish bilateral IOs, kind of like an IV, but into the bone on both legs, as the patient is now unresponsive to any commands or pain stimuli. His breathing rate starts to deteriorate, so we start assisting with his ventilations. As we arrive at the airport, the helicopter is 20 minutes away. His respiratory drive completely fails, so I intubate, which is putting a tube in his throat to secure the airways, and prevent him from choking on his own blood and the like. He then loses his heartbeat. After giving him some cardiac medication, his pulse comes back, and his lungs start showing signs of collapse on both sides. So we put needles into his chest to relieve the pressure. By this time, the helicopter is 5 minutes away, and he loses pulse again. We start giving him the cardiac machine again, but never get another response. He ended up being declared dead on scene. So there we were, with a dead 8-year-old in our ambulance. My daughter was 8 at the time, so after we had a minute to breathe, I broke down. The entire situation was preventable. Mum was driving fatigued. The child was allowed to be in the very back of the SUV without a seatbelt on. I remember seeing a PSP on the ground near where we had found the boy. It hit me really hard. Do realise that this happened a little over 4 years ago, and the details are still fuzzy. So my fellow EMS folks, don't critique, as we all do. Remember, always wear a seatbelt. It's stupid not to. Here are a couple of stories that happened to me as an EMT. As a brand new EMT, I was doing a discharge from an ER around here of a 90-year-old man going back home. The guy had dementia and was pleasantly sitting on the cot. My partner got us lost, which was not good because this man did not want to stay in one spot for more than 10 minutes. Multiple times, I told him to stay seated. He complied gladly the first few times, but he started getting really restless. We finally got to his house on the narrow streets in the woods. Not much room for error to back the medic on his driveway. After a few times of going back and forth, he started unbuckling the straps on the cot and stood up, completely ignoring my polite request for him to stay seated. I looked up front and asked my partner what he was doing, and asked him to hurry up. He looked back at the man, and he had pulled out a pocket knife and was ready to open it. Being brand new, I panicked and told my partner just drive on the gas. I didn't give a crap about the guy and said to get the hell out of here. Once we stopped, he put the knife back in his pocket and started climbing out of the medic, and I walked him from a distance to his door. I assured that he was safely inside of the house and got the hell out of there. Then after straightening up the back of the medic, I noticed his bag of personal belongings was still there. I told my partner since he was the idiot that got us lost, he was bringing the bag to him. The guy decided to grab his shotgun before he answered the door. My partner just dropped the bag at his feet and backed away. I never worked with that guy again. Another story just happened this morning actually. I'm a brand new paramedic and we got a call to a nursing home for a respiratory issue. This guy has a history of dementia too, so he's not all with it and is coughing his lungs out. We get him to the back of the medic, give oxygen and put him on the monitor and start an albuterol/atrovent breathing treatment, and I get ready to start an IV. This guy had the best veins I'd ever seen. I blew the first and second vein and went to a smaller sized needle and went for a third attempt, and the guy started yelling and shaking his arm. I yelled back at him pretty sternly that I needed him to hold his arm so that I could get it. Anyway, I got that one, secured it, and went about the run. No problem. Everything was going fine. We dropped him off at the ER, and afterwards I go over to his paperwork, and in his mile-long list of diagnoses, towards the end I see Parkinson's disease. Totally overlooked it when I was just looking for his history pertinent to respiratory issues. I yelled at the guy with Parkinson's for shaking his arm. Huge douche chills. I work in a special contained laboratory called BSL-3 Lab, where we research tuberculosis. We are one level below BS-4 Lab, which are those crazy ones you see in movies like Outbreak and Contagion. We have to wear what I call biohazard scrubs. A full Tyvek suit with booties and a hood, a full face mask respirator, gloves taped to the suit, and then we double up on more gloves, booties and sleeves. We also have an airlock that you use to get in and out of the lab. It is essentially a closet-sized room with heavy doors. Only one can be opened at a time, and air always flows in the direction inside the lab where you opened either door. So we can easily push lab supplies into the lab. We have an automatic door open button inside the airlock, which I think is just asking for trouble. So whenever a piece of equipment inside the lab breaks, like a freezer, the maintenance people have to put on the biohazard suit and go into the lab in pairs to fix the equipment, since obviously we can't easily remove tuberculosis contaminated equipment for service. Well, one time when our minus 80-degree freezer broke, one of the two maintenance peoples was freaked out and refused to enter the lab. So fine, we said he could stay in the airlock with a walkie-talkie to stay in contact with the other guy who would have to do the servicing of the freezer, while staying behind it in the airlock. There was no need for that guy to put on a respirator or any protective equipment, while the braver maintenance guy was well into fixing the freezer. The other guy in the airlock accidentally leans up against the automatic door open button, and this swings open the door in the lab, and the guy is stuck in the closet-sized room looking right at a bunch of scientists in biohazard scrubs. So he lunges for the other door and exits the lab, and since it's an airlock, of course, it will not open while the door leading into the lab is open. He starts screaming and panicking and just otherwise going foobar. Our lab manager, who was overseeing this freezer fix, runs over to calm him down, which just further freaks him out, since he is in a biohazard suit as well. Now he is at a point where he's hyperventilating and passes out, slumped on the floor of the airlock. This prompts the lab manager to hit a panic button that we have to alert the emergency services. It was a fast response too, because we are on a medical campus, and this also sets off a very large alarm and those spinning red emergency lights. The workers woke up fairly quickly to the alarms, lights, and being surrounded by guys in biohazard suits. When the EMTs arrived shortly after, they had a nice, irate, and terrified patient to deal with. My sister's husband is a firefighter/EMT, who was called to the scene of a little boy who was hit outside of his driveway by a drunk driver. The boy was getting off the bus as his mother was open-armed waiting for him to run to her. The bus driver looked both ways and waved for him to go, but a drunk driver came speeding at 60 to 90 miles an hour around the bend and hit the boy, obliterating his body in two and splattering his brain all over the bus and his mother. My sister's husband was first called on the scene, and as protocol demands, he was to take the pulse of the top half of the boy, as his mother deliriously was screaming inside the house as she was being restrained. Her husband saw 15 school children or more screaming and crying as their busmate was all over their bus. Why he still had to check for a pulse, I will never know. While working for the city, my sister said their marriage was a disaster due to his numbness from the job. He is now a firefighter at an airport and says he feels like his life is back on track. My brother is an EMT/firefighter, and he told me a story about a wheelchair-bound elderly woman who smoked and lived with her grown daughter. She was on oxygen and had a lot of trouble moving, even in her wheelchair. One day, my brother got a call about a house fire. While they didn't know it right away, her daughter had first tried to drag her mother out during the initial stages of the fire before anyone got there. Since the fire started around her, as smoking with oxygen is bad, she was already pretty burnt. The daughter pulled her mother's arms to get her out of the chair and dragged her out of the house since she couldn't walk. But the skin just completely separated and fell off her muscle as if it was a glove or something. The daughter had to give up and run out the house. A lot of the house was already engulfed by the time my brother got there, and the daughter was screaming that her mother was still in there. The house was too far gone, and so they couldn't go in. The daughter and my brother and the rest of the crew had to sit there and listen to the mother screaming while she burnt to death or suffocated. I was a volunteer EMT, somewhere in the mid-Atlantic at a fantastic squad. This is the story of the first time I delivered a baby. Spoiler, it has nothing to do with a baby. We roll up to the scene. A residence in a nice neighborhood. A breezy autumn afternoon. The mother in progress is seated in the hallway bathroom, which must have been a broom closet in its earlier life. The baby is crowning, and this means go ahead and deliver. So I'm a little nervous, but it's cool. Man, is this a tiny bathroom. I grab the OB kit, gown, gloves, forceps, scalpel and clamps for the umbilical cord, and a plastic bag for the placenta. You see, you've got to take the placenta with you to the hospital, so the doctors can inspect it for tearing. So we get the baby out and into the mother's bosom. We load them both on the cot, and I'm in the back doing the EMT thing. The hospital is on the radio asking questions, and when we get to the part about the placenta, my mouth goes dry, as I remember it was sitting on the damn bathroom sink, tied off in a biohazard bag from the kit. Well, anyway, that's where I thought it was. So we send the engine, which had arrived first on scene, back for the placenta. They call on the mobile phone. That's not good. It means what they have to say doesn't belong on the open channel. Yeah, so their almost white golden retriever was definitely a retriever, but he was no longer almost white. Neither were their massive cream-coloured Persian rugs. Apparently, it looked like someone had hosted a murder party in the living room. I never did hear the end of that. The squad paid for the rug. I don't know who cleaned the dog. This is by far the worst one I've heard personally. I was in EMT school back in college, and you are required X amount of hours in hospital work and X amount of time in a rig. A girl in my class who was barely out of high school was fortunate to assigned to a rig with SDFD, which everyone knew received the best calls. So I guess towards the last half of their shift, they received a call about an animal attack and involving an infant. They take the call, and when they get to the scene, everyone there's lives would change. Supposedly the parents were so cracked out, they fed their 11-month-old infant child to their 3 rabid dogs out back. There was barely any recognizable features of what was left of the child. I get choked up thinking about how people out there are like this. So anyway, the poor kid is offered chapel, sort of like a counsellor, along with the other team working on the call. But what I thought was horrible was this girl, who I'm sure is forever scarred, won't get paid leave or extended counselling. I mean, you kinda signed up for this at the beginning. Our teacher said everyone had a cup of coffee, and every day you work, it just feels that much more. This girl's cup filled, and did not stop when it reached full. Many years ago, I, a firefighter/EMT at the time, was driving around town with my friend, a firefighter, in the middle of summer. We were on the main drag in town when we came upon an auto/pedestrian accident. Apparently some local wino had stumbled into the road and gotten hit at 55 miles an hour. I immediately parked on the side of the road and let my training take hold. I ended up kneeling into an expanding pool of blood on the middle of the road, essentially holding this guy's head together, as he had gone through head first into the windshield, and then was ripped back out again and thrown into the road, for what seemed like an eternity. Eventually, I was able to hand it off to an on-duty crew, but not before becoming covered in blood. After I returned home, I showered. My friend then pointed out to me that I was bleeding from my leg. My leg had gotten cut in the pool of blood on some glass. I went for blood-to-blood exposure testing, and it was one of the longest waits of my life to get the results back. Thankfully, they were negative. Here are a few other experiences. My first call in EMS was sexual assault. We had one call where a teenage girl had been jumped by a group of girls from her school, and when her mum tried to save her, they jumped on the mother too. On another, I was riding for the FD, and I had to extricate an acquaintance from a car wrapped around a pole. I had to extricate one of our own members when a car hit his pickup and flipped it over. As for non-patient stories, once we were fighting a fully involved structure fire, and someone didn't attach the hose properly to the truck, and we were standing behind. The other truck started pressurizing the hoses, and it just popped off, swung at us at waist height, missing us by all about a foot, and slammed into a Jetta, smashing out the driver's window and caving in the door. Imagine that hitting us. Also, screw rescuing cats from burning buildings. I've been sent in to get cats from a building with a now under control but not extinguished fire, and cats get scared easily and love to leap at your face with their claws out when you try to rescue them. And to make it worse, the lady didn't even thank me when I brought her cat, and when I told my mum about it, she was just like, "Oh, I saw the news, and the lady said she rescued her cat on there." I was kinda bummed. A year or so ago, I had to transport a patient to a psych facility from a hospital. The patient was around 20, and calm and placid, which is very common for attempted suicides, either because they've been given benzo like Activan, or the natural trend of things. So my partner and I get the story. He tried to electrocute himself and package him up. I tried to make a little conversation and noticed that his pants, sent in a separate bag with his, and he's clothed in hospital scrubs at this point, are all wet. Turns out the guy tried to kill himself by putting a toaster in the tub with him. Normally, I got nosy. Someone tries to kill themselves and they don't need to dwell on it or anything. So I say to him, "I gotta ask, did you know the ground fault circuit interrupter was going to kick in?" The ground fault circuit interrupter is mandated for kitchens and bathrooms by building code locally and will detect this sort of thing. What's a ground fault circuit interrupter, he asked. I'll take that as a no. Another life saved by virtue of not having taken a good shot class, I suppose. My dad was a firefighter and was once first on scene to an accident where a truck driver had swerved into oncoming traffic while texting and driving and hit two motorcyclists. My dad arrived on the scene to find one of the motorcyclists in 3 pieces: his head and shoulders, his upper abdomen, and then his lower abdomen and legs. He was quite obviously dead. The other motorcyclist had lost an arm and a leg. An army ranger had witnessed the accident and was on the scene. He had made 2 tourniquets out of his belt, and the motorcyclist's belt was holding them tight around this guy's arm and leg. The thing my dad said that he'll never forget was the still living motorcyclist asked him if his body was okay. He later died while being airlifted to the hospital. Working in Detroit, we were driving to Post and had a long distance transport in an hour, going 4 hours away. My partner and I are pumped for this transport. We're driving down a main side street, and this 16-year-old kid flags us down saying that his brother has just been shot. I look across the street, and sure enough there's a 22-year-old male with 2 bullet holes in his chest and 1 in the arm. Side note, whole different story about why my partner was a dumbass on this call. We can save that for later. I called to dispatch to let them know what's going on and request police on scene. Dispatch comes back and I quote, 892, this is Detroit. I can't give you an ETA on squad car, just load and go. Get the patient on the stretcher. Hear gunshots go off, and the gunman was still in the area and had shot someone else 2 blocks away, as we later found out. The sound of those shots, knowing that PD isn't anywhere to be found, and you're in the heat of Detroit, stops your heart. We finally take off, but knowing that I could have been shot on that call still sits in my mind. So another story. Approximately 2 a.m. driving under an overpass of John R. They chirp the sirens a few times to see if they stir. No movement. So they throw on all the floodlights to go and inspect the scene. Find the patient, a mid-20s male with several gunshots to the abdomen. Of course, they immediately get the stretcher and load him on when someone turns the corner, runs up close and draws a gun. The medic is face to face with a barrel, and the man tells them they're going to put the body back on the ground and leave. So they put him down and get in the truck and code out, and said they saw several more shots when leaving, so we all assumed the shooter finished the job. By the time PD showed up, which wasn't exactly fast, there was no hope of saving the patient. I don't believe that they ever caught the shooter. So just to finish the story, I'll let you guys know about the worst mistake my partner ever made. One that put me in danger. This is the one I was talking about on the gunshots we were flagged down for. First rule of EMS, at least in my book, is my safety first, my partner's second, and my patient third. The basic concept of a safety setup. First step in every call. If a scene isn't safe, you stage for PD and wait for them to declare the scene safe for EMS arrival. Now, we rolled up on this call and several people see us as this kid is telling us what happened. So we now have 2 options: drive down the block and stage for PD to secure the scene and then come and rescue the probably already dead guy, or jump right into action. Getting the guy while he still has a chance of survival, and not looking like the arsehole ambulance that rolled up on a gunshot and drove 2 blocks away and parked for however long it took for the PD to get there. Keep in mind that Detroit is horribly understaffed in officers, so it may take a while for them to get there. Personally, I have a family to go home to. I don't care how bad it looks on me or my company. I'm not risking my life. I'm driving away and waiting for PD however long it takes. My partner, however, has different plans. She immediately jumps out after hearing what happened and rushes over to start treatment. Now I'm stuck with a dilemma. Do I save my ass and abandon my partner and patient, or do I get out there and help since we already made contact against my wishes? Obviously I got out, pissed beyond belief. If she wants to put herself in harm's way, that isn't my problem. But when you drag me into a shit show, we have a problem. Luckily I didn't die, 'cause you know, that's bad and all. You always assume danger, but especially in Detroit. I've spoken to cops working in gang-related crime who basically said an initial right in one gang is to assault someone in uniform. To them, any emergency worker is the same. We all have flashing lights, uniforms and badges. You are a target at all times. But like you say, sometimes it's not the best option. This scene, for example, would I have gotten in trouble for leaving and staging? No, but definitely a stern talking to. But, as some of you may say, there is family around and an ambulance just left. The general public doesn't understand the whole safety scene thing. In most situations, Detroit is not standard, so don't make assumptions on EMS based on Detroit stories. Police are on the scene before us. Usually they are the ones that let dispatch know that an ambulance is needed, so usually you aren't staging for that long. Plus, if you're staging for a call, you park somewhere where you aren't easily seen by the general public, but still within access of the scene. So to the unknowing pedestrian, the ambulance just hasn't arrived yet. Not me, but a friend of my parents used to be an ambulance driver. One night he gets a call for a car accident. A drunk driver crashed its car. Upon arrival, they start checking everyone only to find the two guys in the front are dead. Trying to get to the back seat, he notices that one of the passengers, two girls, is his own daughter, who is also dead. He took some time off, went back to work a couple of months later, but couldn't bring himself to drive an ambulance anymore. So he worked in the ER for a couple of years. He loved driving the ambulance, so after 4 or 5 years he requested to be one again. Second day on the job, they get a call for a car crash. So he drives over there and immediately recognizes it's his own son's car, who smashed the front into a tree. Kid was dead on impact. When he saw what was left of his son, this guy broke down completely. Shortly after this, he was put in a mental hospital by his wife and remaining daughter, and has been there ever since. One of my first weekends on my own, I got a call to assist EMS. Thinking no big deal, this is usually an extra hand to help lift somebody. I get there, and they say the door was open when they got there, and the hallway is covered in blood. So I have to clear the house. As I enter the house, I notice the back is open, and items from the house were on the back patio. Now I'm thinking home invasion. I call for backup, and due to call volume I get told I have no backup yet. Great. Now, there are 2 directions to go. Right towards the garage or left down the bloody hall. Knowing my destined location was the bloody hall, I had to clear the rest of the house first. So I did so, and it's terrifying thinking that there could still be someone in there. Worst part is, I can hear my victim screaming for help, but not a normal scream, like a painful, hoarse and muffled scream. By the time I get to the end, I find 2 locked doors. She's behind one of them, which could very well have the suspect as well. And the other, I don't hear anything. I end up kicking both, and only find her. She was flayed open all over her body, still alive. We got her extracted and she survived. We come to find out that this was a house used for migrant workers. 15 people lived in a 3-bedroom house. One of the guys got fired and came to the house looking for the boss, but found my victim. He assaulted her with a machete, fled to Honduras directly after committing the act. I'll still never forget the screams or how much blood there was. And all as a rookie. Lol. I got a welcome aboard from my supervisor right away after that. I recently had a wreck where the vehicle swerved off the roadway and about 50 feet into a swamp, maybe 25 feet down an embankment. When I arrived on scene, rescue was doing CPR on a female, ankle deep in mud, with her leg bent the wrong way. We dragged a conscious alert male who was bleeding profusely, but told us there were 3 in the car. Female was dead on scene, but had what EMS called a PA, as she was young, late 20s, and her heart was young with a strong electrical signal, so she was transported to be called by a doctor. Troopers told me the driver was charged as he ran from the wreck. They also told me when the vehicle struck and broke through a 34-inch diameter pine tree, the female was ejected and she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I had to go home and shower middle of shift, and I found out later her father died at the same intersection hit by a speeding driver. This is just one of the more recent ones that's not leaving my mind. My grandparents raised me. One was a paramedic and one was a fire chief. They saw a lot of stuff. An old man died in a bathtub and wasn't found for a couple of weeks. When they went to drain the bit of rancid water that was left, large pieces of man came off. The body bag was basically full of small chunks. A boy had gone missing, and they got a call that he may have been found. The boy had been molested, murdered, and thrown into a local animal sanctuary in hopes the body would be eaten. There was very little left when they found him. A semi-truck had rolled and skidded upside down along the road. My grandfather could see the man hanging inside, so he reached in to take a pulse. Sadly, the man's head had been completely worn away from friction, and my grandfather's fingers went into his neck before he realized what happened. One of my favorite stories working as a college EMTB was of my first night teching calls. I was a senior, recently minted as an EMTB, and was charged with taking point on calls one night. Sounds fun, right? Well, after the initial freezing up on the first call, things did get better. Until we had one of our last calls for the night. An intox. Simple enough. Party girl drank too much booze, got picked up by campus security, who called us to send her to the hospital. Shitty system, but sometimes we had a few kids with alcohol poisoning who needed it. Others just got really pissed and tried to fight us. This girl was with her friends, as is the norm, and the friend asked if she could come with us. Sure, why not? We had room for one extra in the cab. So we're rolling and this girl asks for our names. We tell her, and she decides to refuse to use them, claiming that they were stupid. I was renamed Andrew, and another guy in the back with me was promptly named Alex. As we're en route to the hospital, the patient screams up to the driver, "Tiki, hey Tiki." Remember that guy in the back renamed Alex? That was the real Tiki. So he's responding, What is it? Until we realise she's signalling to our driver, conveniently actually named Alex, and he acknowledges her and she politely asks, "How would you feel if right now these guys got some action?" Her friend jumps in and says, "Sorry, she's drunk. Just ignore her." But Alex, true to his jokerish nature, played along. I'd be pretty impressed. It's not that big back there, and those pants aren't easy to get off. Satisfied with his response, she began to declare that Alex and I were going to be getting some tonight. Screw those guys in the front. They think they're living the real life. You guys, you're living the tiki life. We couldn't stop laughing at such a declaration, especially when our driver chimes in and goes, "What about me?" Without missing a beat, she exclaimed, "Ah, screw you. You're living the real life. You ain't getting nothing." I look up and saw him biting his arm to stop from laughing. Now we finally arrive at the hospital, and the friend, relatively quiet up until this point, grabs my arm and asks me if it's safe. The hospital is in the Bronx, so not the best neighborhood, but there are always almost cops there, due to perps being brought in. I tell her this, and she makes me to promise she'll be safe. As a young white female, I don't know what could happen to me, so please promise me. You get the idea. The minute that I reassured her to start walking towards the door, I hear my name being called. And within the 30 seconds it took to reassure her, a huge fight broke out right in front of the door. Two guys were just brawling it out. There goes my credibility to this lady. So we rapidly decided to reroute to a new hospital. The friend is hyperventilating in the back, so we work to calm her down, taking her to our secondary hospital. We arrive there, quickly make sure there's no possibility for a fight or any danger, and bring the patient in. She was surprisingly complacent on the ride from the first hospital to the second. As we wait for a bed to free up, she asks for something to prove that she's sober, thinking that if she could do simple tasks we would let her go. She wasn't. I relent and give her some maths problems. I say 5 and 5, and she almost instantaneously responds 10. 7 plus 3. A moment passes. 10? 4 plus 6. This one took her a minute, but she finally says, probably 10. Now with this last problem, the nurse was signalling us to bring her over, and I give her 2.5 times 4 as her final math problem. As she thinks, the nurse begins to take her away, and she starts screaming, "I swear to God, if it's 10, I'm going to be pissed at you," and all walked away laughing. I was rewarded by my crew with an impromptu trip to Dunkin' Donuts for living the tiki life. Good times. Also, this ended up being voted Call of the Year, due to the story.